Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. This is Glenn Kaiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute, and we're continuing our conversations about fantastic sounding shows on episodic streaming platforms. And today I'm so happy to be talking to the team on Westworld. We're joined by Sue Cahill, who is the supervising sound editor on the show. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
Keith Rogers is the re-recording mixer on the show.
Hello there.
And Benjamin Cook is the sound designer and the re-recording mixer on Westworld. Hi, Ben.
Hey.
And obviously, we're coming to you remotely because we're still on coronavirus lockdown. We're recording today using the Dolby On app, so I'll give a little shout out. Dolby On is a free iOS and Android application which is designed to make recording and live streaming sound and image with unparalleled audio quality incredibly simple, using nothing but your device. Dolby On empowers creators to make their statement with amazing sound quality anytime and anywhere. All right, so that was my plug for Dolby On. And thanks everyone for joining us. I've been really excited to talk with you guys about Westworld. I was a fan of the show since episode 1. I think that this particular season, we're here to talk obviously about season 3, really took the show in some exciting new directions. Lots of interesting possibilities for sound design and mix, I think, got opened up by leaving the parks and going out into the real world of what I think is a 2057. So I'm thrilled to be here with you guys, the core creative team on the sound of the show to talk about it. Keith, I wanted to start with you because you're an old Westworld hand at this. You've been with the show since the beginning, since the first episode on season 1, and in fact you won an Emmy for the season 1 show, The Bicameral Mind, for mixing. So I just wanted to start with you. Like, has the approach to sound changed over the course of the 3 seasons? Has the approach evolved at all over the course of time with the show?
Yeah, naturally it evolves just because of the content of the show. But it's been the same creative team as far as the producing side, mainly driven by that. And but the sound, season 1, HBO still just broadcasts in 5.1, so the show's always mixed in 5.1. But starting in season 2, we mixed in Atmos as well. And season 1, we went back and did Atmos after the season was over. But season 2, we mixed natively in Atmos, going straight from the beginning. So we mixed season 2 and then this season in Atmos right from the start. And we were monitoring the Atmos the whole way and using that as our master, really. And then, so that was a little different than season 1, where we mixed completely in 5.1 and then went back later and tried to figure out how to make an Atmos version of it. But the show's, obviously gone away from horses and wagons and Western type stuff to this season was more futuristic and, Ben created a whole new landscape or soundscape, I should say, for this season. So, just kind of incorporating that, but the creative process has been the same with the producers. I've worked with them for quite a while now, so they have a system of the way they get the show shaped the way they want it.
Well, Benjamin and Sue, I'm kind of curious. You guys are new to the show this season, I believe. You're both Emmy-award winners yourselves for, Susan, you won for Black Sails, as did Benjamin. And Ben, you also won for The Pacific and for Westworld. So you've been part of the HBO family for quite a while. But I'm curious, how you guys, tell me a little bit about the workflow. Sue and Ben, how you divide the editorial duties, and then how that material gets to the stage, and Ben, how you and Keith work together on the mixing stage.
Do you want to take it, Sue, or should I say?
I think we can both take it, but yeah, Ben pretty much headed up the effects side, and I headed up the dialogue ADR side. And Ben started earlier than I did with the sound design. He can tell you more about that, but he started cutting in-house with at the cutting room. So that was really handy because he was able to work on scenes ahead of time and get it in the sequence, get it to the picture editors ahead of time so that everyone can get familiar and comfortable with the sound design early on, which I think was really handy.
And so, as Sue said, I started early. I would cut a lot of the key sequences I cut, and then of course designing all the various vehicles and the robots and the there's a lot of atmospheric things too that were created for the show. So, the show was obviously different because we're set in reality in the future. And, the show's always really relied heavily on sound to tell their story anyways. But, we had a kind of a different overarching aesthetic that they wanted to achieve this season in particular. Jonah had this idea of, right from the beginning, he talked about this. He wanted an idyllic dystopia, but he didn't want it stark. He wanted it very rich and textured, but he had this idea that they had the noise cancellation technology had gotten so advanced that there's nothing abrasive or loud out in the world. Everything was very soft and peaceful, and that was like the overarching theme for everything, from all the UI things to the vehicles, the voice of the world itself. So that was the idea. He used terms like mellifluous. Mellifluous. It's even hard to say.
But everything is very everything is pleasant. Everything is pleasing. There's no noise pollution. There's no busy horns. People aren't stressed. Everything is generally positive. Their lives have been made better. So it's
That's a really interesting aesthetic, because I had made notes when I went back and took a look at the show again. They're like, there are no phone futzes in Westworld. Everything, when they're talking to each other, even through their devices, the voice is very present, almost as if it's within their own mind, which I thought it's a very interesting psychological construct.
Yeah, he had this idea, this sonic coherence, or a euphonic consonance. These were all terms that he used, for this world, and that was our overarching principle with everything. So,
yeah, which makes it all the more powerful when the order completely starts to break down in the latter episodes, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the twist.
Well, tell me a little bit about the process of mixing in Atmos. I presume, Keith, it's you and Ben on the board. How big of a room are you in? What are you putting in the overheads? Like, how are you guys using the Atmos?
Well, it was really awesome having Ben on the show this season. Ben's super talented, and it was really cool having him designing the show as the show was being cut. And so a lot of the cool atmospheric design ideas and kind of where we were putting some of that stuff really came from Ben's design. And then the other the dialogue type stuff, Walla group, that kind of things, we kind of like going back to the theme that nothing was abrasive or sound just kind of was there, but it was pleasing and stuff. We even had that approach with background Walla, that kind of thing, where it was there, it was present, but it was never like annoying or really super present. But the main thing, I guess, we scene by scene, depending on what was going to happen in the scene, we would use the Atmos to try to help tell the story. And the show is pretty much music from top to bottom as well. So the music is such a huge part of the show. It really creates mood and themes and for each character, and there's all kinds of reoccurring themes and stuff. So Ben and I, and with Sue's guidance too, we had to decide what we were going to play. The music is thick, so we had a lot of, we had to get stuff to play without being just pushed loudly, So there's a lot of tricks to make it all feel like it's playing well together. And like I said, the music is kind of spread throughout the show. I spread the music into the overheads a little bit, all around us. Ben's doing the same thing, picking certain ambiences to put up in the overheads. Pulling the music off of the front a little bit helps us with getting more stuff playing up in the front speakers, because you only have so much room to get everything in there with the score that's that thick and big. The score was cool this year. It went away from some of the more classic kind of Western themes that we had into Ramin's score. It was very synthy this year, and a lot of kind of heavy droney stuff. So that stuff eats up a lot of dynamic space. So that's the challenge of getting everything in there. And we, our executive producer Jonah loves music and he likes it loud. So that's always a challenge. I mean, we've got so much stuff in there trying to fight for space, that a lot of scenes we're just maneuvering to play what's important at the moment.
And I would do a lot of things where I'm panning things maybe farther back in the room than I normally even would, just to give us, just for the space, just so we can hear it, just so we can hear things play over the music. So in particular, and then there were certain scenes where there was a lot of visual camera movement to things, and then we always, kind of use that as a guide to win. And then of course, if they'd done anything in their temp track, that was an easy way for us to really open it up and spice that section up by moving stuff around in the room itself.
Well, Ben, I wanted to ask you. I think you said previously that you were embedded with the picture cutting team for a while. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, and then you're obviously, tell us what this room that you're in. This is your sound design studio at home, right?
It's a 7.1.2 Atmos. I was an early adopter, very early on. Have grown with it. I love it. I love the fold downs. I'm a big fan of the format. What else can I say? I think the integration in Pro Tools has, it's so much better than in the beginning, and now it's very seamless. It's very easy, and it's just getting better. The app is one of the best things Avid's developed in 10 years, and so it's there's a lot of great things that they're doing.
So you were able to design and build a lot of your effects elements in 7.1.2. But what happened when you kind of embedded in the picture cutting room? What was the setup that you had there?
I mean, typically I would give them, it was anywhere from stereo to 5.1, kind of setup, but I would usually give them, bounced sequences, kind of like what we do. I use the same approach when we cut on films. We're doing things, and then it gets bounced out to them, and they embed it into their tracks. And then, or when you do a temp dub, they're using those stems, and you may give them the full 5.1, but they usually don't cut with that. They usually just take 2 or 3 tracks, and that's what they're using to cut against. So it's a very similar kind of thing, system. And then I would be constantly conforming, keeping up with the cuts, and then that would all get turned over to the sound effects editor. Once we started the editorial process itself, and all the mixing things that I did within the sessions all carried forward. So my effects editor uses the same, my template, my mix session. So, and it all carries forward. And that's pretty much how most people are working these days, especially on the big movies. You want all that work to carry forward. So
right.
I'm curious. You guys have all had feature film experience, as well as obviously a tremendous amount of television experience. What my 2 cents is that it seems like the quality expectations for TV have risen to the level of feature film. But I'm curious. I mean, as you're approaching a new project, do you think about it any differently, knowing that it's going to go to episodic versus theatrically anymore?
The only thing that you have to consider is time and budget. I mean, that's really, it's scale. It's scale. That's really what it is. So you approach it the same, you just have to scale it differently at different times. So, if I can convince them on a television project to let me start early and start feeding them material, I love working that way, because, you don't want to be reinventing things on the fifth day of your, on the last day of your mix or whatever. So, and that can happen if you're not prepared. So luckily we didn't have any of that this season. I don't remember anything that fell apart. I think they were familiar with everything. And, other than the thing that did change a lot was music. Actually, Jonah would really, he was always changing a cue or two. So, but in general, I'd worked really closely with Chris Gallard, the music editor, in the beginning. I had mock-ups, and I had a pretty good idea what the music was going to be doing. Ramin had supplied a lot of their music, or they're using a lot of music from the previous seasons anyways. So we had a pretty good idea of what, where the music was going to be and where we needed to be in relation to that.
Sue, talk to us a little bit about the process and kind of the timeline. Now, I'm presuming that this wasn't kind of a situation where you got episode 1 and they delivered that to you, you finished that, and then you went to episode 2 and you finished that, and then you went to episode, like, it tends to all get into a jumble, but sort of how...
Yeah, we kind of had all the balls in the air, always juggling all of them, yeah. But there are some advantages to that, like when you're shooting ADR, it's nice to have several episodes queued, so when you bring in an actor, they can knock out multiple episodes at once. So that helps with the time efficiency. The actors like that, so that they don't have to come in as many times. So there are advantages, but also, it can be a little bit tricky trying to keep all the balls in the air, keep all the juggling.
How long were you guys on the show, and what was a mixing schedule for a typical episode?
Let's see. Well, each episode I think we had a little bit different mix schedule on each one. I think the first episode we spent the longest. We had the most number of days on the first one, just being the first episode of a new season, and Jonah directed that episode. So we did spend the longest on the first, and then the ones in the middle had a little bit less time, and then the last couple episodes were pretty complicated, so we had a little bit more time on those.
We actually mixed out of order. We started with episode 4 first, and we did 4, 3, or 4, 4, 3, or 4, 2, 3, 1, I think.
But then our playbacks were in order, 1 through 8.
But our playbacks were in order. So Sue and my crew had to prepare everything in advance. We would do kind of a pre-mix pass. So we'd spend our first 3 days getting through the show, kind of me and Keith's pass on the show, and then we'd move to the next episode. And we do the same thing.
Internal playback while we waited for the visual effects to be updated, and once we got all the visual effects, then we had another pass. So there were multiple passes. We had to kind of...
And about how many days would you spend on the mixing stage for each? Well, you said they were different, but I'm kind of curious what the range is. And also, tell me a little bit about the stage where you mixed. Was it a big feature room, or was it a near field room? Or
I think the average was 6. Right, for most episodes,
5 or 6, depending. But,
and then a couple of them we might have done 8 on the first one. There was a lot of not just full days. It's interesting because, like they were saying, we mixed out of order. We had to mix the first 4 or 5 for press, so they were kind of finished, but not completely finished, and we were still waiting. Maybe music-wise, we might have been waiting for live strings at times. So then we'd get that, and I'd have to replace that in the music and things like that. So they were always a work in progress until one needed to be delivered, and then we started having to get things done. So then we kind of started getting things done in order. But we mix at Universal Dub 2, and it's a full theatrical Atmos stage, medium size. It's a large television stage, really large television stage. We have a really big backfield. We can probably get I don't know,
20.
25 people comfortable in here if we need to. Full theatrical Atmos. We mixed in home Atmos for this, but yeah, very comfy. We mixed on the icon, the Avid icon, still in here. Do you want to know about the equipment that we have? Or actually, Ben didn't though. Ben actually worked on.
Yeah,
his,
I brought in my S3 and a dock and my pad because I use the.
And you just set it right on top of the console.
Yeah, and yeah. So instead of an icon on top of a Harrison, it was an S3 on top of an icon.
That's the new old school, new school way.
You got to have the right tool for the right job.
Very lots of horsepower. It's on the Universal lot. Great place to work. Great engineering support. Our recordist Rick Mara's the best.
Yeah, it's a fantastic room. It's probably, I would dare to say, it might be the best sounding TV room in LA. They did a lot of tweaks to that. It used to be a film room, actually. It used to mix films in there. And then when we did Black Sails, they really updated that room for us, and they installed the Atmos, and they did a beautiful job. So, and it's still a very great sounding, very comfortable room for the clients and for us. So,
and it's we found that it translates really well. Besides, the Dolby Atmos folding down so great, which we love that, because we can, while we're mixing in Atmos, we're able to check our 5.1 and check a 2-track in real time, just so we can see how things are folding down, and we love that about it. But the room itself here is like Ben said, very comfortable, well designed, and it's just a great place to work.
Do you guys have conversations as you're going, because you're mixing natively in Dolby Atmos, but you have to be aware that a whole lot of people are going to be listening to this through the tiny speakers on their televisions as well. So are there accommodations that you guys make for that, or how do you approach the fact that people are going to have very different experiences, and some people are going to watch it on their phones, on their earbuds, right?
That is the challenge now. Is there's not just one master really. So the way we kind of accomplished mixing for multiple scenarios was in the print master. We're checking as we're mixing as well. We're checking low end on the smalls and stuff. But when we print mastered this year, we started by print mastering the 2-track to see how things were translating to that, and that would be a good indicator for us to for things that maybe we needed to tuck back or low end, or things that weren't translating correctly, and then we could go back in and punch that in and fix that and the 5.1 as well, because they're all being generated through the Dolby Atmos. So we were kind of updating everything at the same time and able to check things and make it so almost all the different versions all sounded great, and they all worked as well. We didn't have to completely remix for stereo or any of that. So we're constantly kind of checking as we go. But that way we print mastered this year was very important, because you don't want streaming devices to get a compromised 2-track. There's so many that are actually an actual 2-track that they're using. It's not just a rendered file from the AC3 file. They're actually using it on some devices too. So it's nice to know that your 2-track works and it sounds great. And then if they're listening in a AC3 setup or at home and they're listening in 5.1, or the box is going to do its fold down for that as well. But knowing that we had a printed 2-track was real important to us.
Sue, I wanted to ask you, obviously performance on any show is really important, but in Westworld, you got a lot of characters who are delivering a lot of exposition through the dialogue, and the performances in the show are just incredible. So, I don't want you to throw anybody under the bus, but can you tell how were the production tracks on the show, and how, tell us a little bit about working with the dialogue on this season.
Well, the dialogue was actually quite challenging on this season.
There's a lot of location work.
There's a lot of locations, a lot of new locations, a lot of exteriors. We were in downtown. a lot of times we would hear traffic. And again, in the future, we don't want to hear traffic. So it's getting rid of that. It was a lot of noise reduction and a lot of cleaning up. It was a lot of work. And like you said, they're quite particular about performances. And so ADR was not always an option. We would get it as a choice, to have as an option, but oftentimes we would go back to production. So that meant doing a deep dive into production alts and cleaning up the noise reduction to really save as much as we can, because they did get pretty attached to performances. But yeah, the dialogue was quite challenging, but we had a great dialogue editor helping me out, Jane Bogle. She's fantastic. So, so there was a lot of ADR. I think voiceover was interesting this season. We had several episodes that had a lot of voiceover. And again, they are particular about performances on that. And voiceover tends to be, I think, rewritten often. So it's never quite final. So that changed a lot. And during playbacks, it was a lot of going into finding different takes. Even though they had signed off on what they wanted, it was like, let's make it better by switching out this take. And so it was a lot of digging into fine alts and sometimes manufacturing words that weren't there, but we had to change it. So
yeah, and it's I'm thinking specifically about Caleb, his character. There was a lot of, and he had these sort of virtual kind of therapy sessions with his old war buddy.
We were deployed to Crimea, Russian Civil War. Nothing civil about it. The U.S. was officially on the ground for humanitarian aid, but my unit was there for something else.
Yeah, there was a lot of really, really present voiceover. And then, of course, you get into the later episodes, you have the voice of Rehoboam as well, right?
Right. Yeah, so, yes, Caleb had a couple episodes with voiceover. And again, they were going for different performances. So sometimes it was like, well, do we want him to be speaking to, like, if he's speaking to his therapist, Dr. Green, or is he really speaking to Dolores here? And so we had, so there was a lot of discussion there. And you were mentioning the Rehoboam voice, and then there was the Solomon voiceover. So in episode 7, that was a big story point, and there was auditions for who should be the voice of Solomon. There's also a lot of auditions. This is a little bit side topic, but the voice of Insight, right? That was a big new character this season, and that was the voice of the future, right? So what does the voice of the future sound like? So it's a computer voice, but computer voices have progressed where they don't sound robotic, but yet there's something about them that is...
They don't sound like Siri.
But there's something about them that just sounds like a computer voice.
A little bit unnatural, something that just pulls your ear a little bit sideways and makes you, turn your head.
There was a lot of discussion on what this voice should be, and at first Jonah was really set that it should be a computer voice. So I pulled all these choices from different text-to-speech programs that we have now, like Microsoft and Google and Amazon Polly, and I had a whole bucket of computer voices, and none of those seemed to work. And then we went down the road of getting auditions from Loop Group, and it was getting that voice that was, again, pleasing. It should be a pleasant voice, but something about it that's computer, that sounds like a computer. So it was in the performance. So there was an extensive search there to find the right voice, and then we finally did, and then tried to get the right performance from them, and then I left it in Keith's trusty hands to do the treatment that they wanted to do our Insight voice, our voice of the future.
Yeah, there was a bit of a challenge in the treatments, because I know you guys were talking about earlier about futzing of dialogue and all that stuff. There's so much. There's all kinds of different treatments going on, and going back to the, what does the future sound like? Everything is supposed to sound a little better, like the things that were in Caleb's, a lot of his voiceover and stuff, and the things that he was hearing, it was like in his earbud, in his head, so it was supposed to sound great to him. And how do you sell that to the audience still, that it's communication, but it's in his head? And so we tended to go more subtle with the futzing and that kind of stuff this season. And, we did some, some kind of treatments on the voices to make them a little off, a little computerized, or, different things. So there's quite a bit of different treatments going on depending on who's talking, where it's coming from. Is it a computer? Is it coming from the voice of God? All kinds of different stuff. So
Holograms. We had a hologram treatment.
Hologram. There was hologram whenever someone showed up in a hologram. There was a slight treatment. Because they're always what we know now as what we hear, like, oh, that's what a computer sounds like. In 50 years, is it going to sound, or are we going to have refined it to where it's almost undetectable? So that was kind of what we were trying to play with. But sometimes in the story, if you don't feel some kind of futz, it doesn't feel right, because you're like, well, where's that voice coming from?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So you have to treat it very delicately. Yeah. One of the things that I'd love to, I took a lot of notes. There's so many sequences that, we could spend all day talking about some of the fantastic, sound sequences in the show this season. But I think that one of the things that I really appreciated that you guys did was you really used sound design to give subjective experience a lot, especially with Caleb's character. We learn one of the things that I think that Westworld does really well, and that episodics do really well when they're great, is it gives you information very slowly over time, in little drips and drabs. And one of the things that we learn about Caleb through these flashbacks of his experience to the war, those are a recurring element, obviously, in season 3. So I'd love to hear you guys talk about sort of how you approached constructing the sound of Caleb's flashbacks and kind of giving the audience the experience of what it was like being in his head.
Well, a lot of times for Caleb, it was no sound. A lot of things were very or a very muted treatment. So that was kind of the big differentiation for most of the flashbacks for Caleb in particular.
Until we got to episode 7, and then we started playing the sound for his flashbacks. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because I made a note specifically in episode 7. You spent a lot of time, in Crimea, but it turns out not to be Crimea. So it was really interesting, kind of the sleight of hand that you guys were doing with the sound design.
The quants had a strategy engine looking at the data and feeding us names. Target acquired. Never easy taking a life. The limbics helped. They dulled everything. Emotions, memories.
Confirmed?
Confirmed.
Yeah, exactly, because we were seeing everything through Caleb's memories at first, and he thought that he was in Crimea when in fact he was in LA. So we had Russian voices, in the towns through our loop group. We had native Russian speakers, so that was part of the atmosphere. And then there was that mislead there when we find out he had been re-educated.
Yeah, we did a lot of transitions going in and out of scenes into Caleb's things that kind of told you we were going into that subtly, and that is the challenge with this show. There's so many things going on, and there's so many flashbacks and stuff, and you got to remember what treatments you've been using and how, so doesn't seem like there's many scenes when you're just kind of cruising on a dialogue scene. There's always something going on. So it really keeps us on our toes and remembering that we're used, hey, remember last time we had treatment on that. So you just have to make sure you're tracking the show too, which is, it's a challenge. It's a heady show, and you really have to track with it,
Well, another character that you spend a lot of time, I think, in their subjective experience is William. And I wanted to ask you about the, William hallucinates a lot in this season of the show. And specifically, I think there was some really beautiful sound design in episode 6, which is the mental hospital where William is.
Don't you do this to me!
So tell me a little bit about how you approached being in that character's head and kind of constructing the sonic environment of that hospital.
Well, Jonah had mentioned in spotting, well, it wasn't even in spotting, I think it was an after spot note that he's like, I want it to sound like 2001. It was Space Odyssey when the character is hearing things in the spaceship, and there's like these weird voices, like cries and moans and things, and they're very atmospheric. And so we watched, that was kind of our inspiration, and we watched that, and then I created some elements that were similar, hyenas and voices, and really treated distant movement, groans and creaks and things of that nature. And then Sue shot a lot of group as well for that, and she could tell you
just weird stuff, someone just whispering in a creepy way, or laughing, or talking to themselves, but just to try to have a lot of variation. And then these guys here placed it all around the room for us to
us. Again, another great place where the Atmos came into play. We were able to fly a lot of that stuff around the room, around the listeners, just to envelop the people into the story more. So envelop the listener. Yeah.
Another great scene for the Atmos was that first scene in episode 4 when Man in Black is hallucinating, and you've got the dialogue just surrounding you there all over, and that was a really fun scene because we had voices in production that were slowed down, pitched, sped up, and pre-lapped, post-lapped, and Keith really had fun tossing it around the room, and we had ADR there too of Dolores, and that was just a really really cool psychological scene.
I know who I am. I know what's real. I know what's real.
William?
I know you're not fucking real! I know you're not real! I know you're not real! I know who the fuck I am.
And a lot of that we're following the lead of the picture editor, what they had kind of designed. And then we were just, again, expanding, adding more elements, moving things more in the space.
Yes, the picture editor gave us a great roadmap, so that really helps. And then it's just the having fun fine-tuning stuff on the stage.
Yeah. You guys were also given some really fun opportunities in episode 5 when Caleb ingests the genre drug, which kind of induces him to go on a trippy kind of movie odyssey, and I can just imagine sort of the fun conversations that you guys had about that. Obviously, the music, Ramin Djawadi's score is doing a tremendous amount of great work in those sequences too, to kind of communicate. We're in a Shining sequence now, or some of the various genres that we're in. But what were you guys doing from a dialogue and a sound effects perspective as well to kind of communicate that idea of shifting genres that Caleb was perceiving?
From sound effects point of view, a lot of that was me staying out of the way. To be honest, it's like, let the music do its thing. But there was, of course the ride share sequence, there's a lot of vehicle movement and gunplay and that. So it was a lot of trade-off. So there would be huge sections where music was driving it, and then you'd shift gears, and then the sound effects would drive it. And it's really like Keith had said earlier, is really the transitions between those elements. Those were the important areas, and those are the areas that we spent the most time on for sure. going in between the music and the sound effects.
Yeah, we actually had a lot of ADR from Caleb too, from Aaron Paul. They wanted to feel like we were inside his head. So all of his breaths, he did all of those. There wasn't much in production to begin with, but he redid all those slow-mos. That's all performance. I mean, that was him doing each and every one of those, which was quite a bit. But then you really felt like you were with him. We were in his head.
There are some great moments for Maeve in this season too, from a sound design perspective and a mixing perspective as well. I'm thinking about, there's that great sequence in episode 2 when she figures out how to overtax the simulation and get it to break down.
Theoretically, the real part of the non-trivial zeros is 1/2, which would mean that these non-trivial zeros are complex numbers.
What's the point of this little exercise?
If we could prove it, we could confirm that the error term and -1 times -1 should be equal to the principal square root of 1.
But -1 and +1 can't be the same thing.
Square root of -x is equal to I times square root of x for any x greater than or equal to 0.
Wait, what?
Yeah, again, that was something that we spotted early on. They had some ideas, and really it was me throwing things to them, and a bit of back and forth of what that was going to end up. I think once we got into the actual editorial process, it was pretty much designed and laid out, other than the robot when Maeve takes over the Harriet robot, because that was visual effect, and there wasn't much of that initially. So
Harriet is the drone robot that she takes over.
The drone robot that's kind of has the circular kind of round disc head. So there's three mechs or 3 robots in the show. There's George, which is Caleb's worker buddy. Then there's Harriet, which was this kind of disc-headed, similar kind of technology. And then there's the big mech.
I also love the moment for Maeve when she's walking through, and I think it's Singapore, and she's short-circuiting all of the machinery as she goes looking for I think she's going to the morticians. That sequence really developed over time. They kind of changed the story of it from the first script, and then what they shot was a little bit different. And then they wanted to use a song in there at one point, and so that one was a bit of a struggle, actually. That was one that ended up being, we went clear to the end, I think, and it was, there was a lot of back and forth on what that, how that should play out. So that one took a bit of work, and there was a lot of Keith had done a lot of work with, people walking by, and there's conversations, and Sue had recorded a bunch of 8 group things for me and gave them to me, and then I processed them so they were digital, and they kind of went through this transformation of being like maybe televisions or radio things to like more digital phone conversations, and then even at one point became like the sound of machine, the machine mind behind all that. So
yeah, I just remember we worked on that sequence for quite a bit. We kept going back and coming back to it and trying new things, and well, I think we finally got it to where Jonah was real happy with it, and Nothing small in this show.
It was certainly a lot of fun. I mean, there's just a ton of things going on, and a lot of little details. You'd walk by a little guy with his noodles, and you'd hear that, and then or a cart or screen that would blast on and off, and there's lots of things to hit. So, and they wanted to hear it all.
There was a lot of great Foley in the show this season. And of course, I'm thinking about Maeve dragging her sword along the kind of the catwalk way. Can you tell me a little bit about the Foley on the season?
My Foley crew is a crew that I've worked with before on several projects. So we have a very, understood aesthetic. I kind of explained to them what I thought, in broad terms, what the show should sound like. And they did a great job of coverage and all the things. But
that sword in particular, we went away from production on that one. We had production in there for a long time, ended up removing that.
So at the final, we finally got rid of production, and it became all Foley and sound effects. Yeah.
We usually try to save as much production effects as we can. Actually, Jonah will miss it when we take stuff out. But that was one instance where he wanted to take it out.
Keith, I wanted to ask you, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this Ramin Djawadi's score, he's scored all 3 seasons of the show. I would definitely call Westworld a score forward show. The score is very present and does a lot of storytelling, and obviously that poses challenges and opportunities in the mix. So I'm just curious, at what point did the score come to you? Were you hearing rough versions early? Were you able to work with that as you guys went through the process, or how did it? And how much separation did you have delivered to you to work with the score?
The music's huge. It's I've worked with Ramin now on a few shows because Jonah uses him faithfully. So I worked with him before this, and then all 3 seasons of Westworld. And his music is fantastic. It's so dynamic, and it's big, and he puts so much effort into it, and it has so many themes, and it, like you said, it kind of carries the show. That's the style of the show, so you can't avoid it. That's the way it is. And so the challenge is the music's big, it's full sounding, it's usually got orchestra behind it or big synth and stuff. And I guess the biggest challenge is to really create dynamics, create a dynamic mix where it's just not, top to bottom music full on, and it's a challenge. And so we really maneuver and are working the score quite a bit just to make sure you can, like you said, there's so much, big sections of dialogue, but there's score behind it and all kinds of story elements going on. I find it really fun music to mix. It's really neat to all the different elements and the themes. And Chris Caller, the music editor, is fantastic, and he's done a lot of work before it gets to me as far as getting things in the right place and getting people kind of ready to expect what they're going to hear when they get the final mix. When it comes to me, I do get separation, a little more stem layout. Strings are separate from percussion, low percussion, highs, all kinds of stuff, guitar, whatever the score has going on. And then my goal is to separate some of that stuff so it plays and it's not just all slammed into the left, right. So the more we can spread it out in the room, you can really feel the music and hear the different elements. So that's really what I'm doing, is I'm spreading the music. I'm doing an overall level control, of course, but really trying to make the music feel, even when it's low, it's still supporting the scene. It's there, and not just playing it so loud that you can't hear anything else. It is a challenge. I mean, Ben saw going through that. It's like, man, the music is just going. So it's hard at times to create lots of dynamics when you go from one big thing to another. But there are scenic big scenes where you can, the music is featured and it's beautiful, and we don't play anything against it and just let the music take over.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's definitely, I mean, it's a style and an aesthetic, and in some ways it kind of reminds me of sort of the Star Wars way of scoring.
It's definitely a Nolan brother thing. The Nolans like music, and it's a great style. They've nailed it. So.
And is Atmos a tool that you use to kind of carve out some space for yourself with the music?
Sue and Ben can back me up on this. It's, our first pass we go through when we really try to get things, we know when the music's going to kind of drive a lot of the scenes. I'll spread stuff out as much as I can, put stuff in the overheads, take it off the front a little bit, and really use the surrounds to help us keep the size without, overall level. And then a lot of times we go through and we think, the music's pretty good, and we'll play back and we'll get the general note of raise the music. So it becomes a challenge, because at that point you've got a lot of delicate balances already right there, and we've got to up it up, up the music and still kind of keep the integrity of the sound we were trying to accomplish. So it's not set it and let it go ever on Westworld music, that's for sure.
Well, one of the themes that we've been talking about on this season is how COVID-19 has affected folks and their work, and I'm aware, I don't think you guys were quite finished with Westworld when things started to kind of go into lockdown mode. So how did you guys deal with that challenge of trying to finish a show when everything's kind of shutting down around you?
Well, I'll just say a little at the beginning here. It was interesting. We were going along just fine. I think we were in episode 4, and actually Jonah was kind of one of the first ones coming in, starting to say, "Hey guys, we need to prep for this, this virus that's coming in. I think it's going to be a big deal." And his company Kilter had started to implement practicing getting people out of the office, and started to get remote editing going on. So we're like, "Oh, this is really happening. How's it going to affect us?" And we kept going on the stage here with starting out with beginning of being essential and being guys wearing, it was at the beginning. It was new for everybody. So it was at the beginning phases of people wearing masks and how many people are going to be in the room. And we kind of went, I think, through episode 5. Is that when we started deciding to do a little bit more remote? I think Sue at that point was off the stage, and we made an effort where it was just the mixers and our recordists on the mix stage, and everybody was remote at that point. And we started doing remote playbacks through Comcast. No, not Comcast. What was it called? Clearview. Clearview. Yeah, Clearview.
On that, box.
Yeah, and then we'd have a kind of a old-fashioned phone call where we'd have everybody on the call to talk over notes, and they could get a feed of our mix real time with picture, and they could hear everything we were doing. So we were able to do fixes that way, and so we started doing the remote thing that way, and I think we at times had 12, 15 people watching the playback, listening to the stereo fold down, and then they would get back on the conference call, and we would
spend all day on the phone.
Yeah. And we'd get, we email us notes, and then we would do remote notes and prioritize to the biggest things, and then normally we would have another playback to play back all the revisions. But it was really a challenge because we were going along fine, but having the technology that we have now, like Ben, at a couple episodes later, Kilter decided they didn't want as many people on the stage. So we had Ben mixing remotely, and Ben's got a great room at home, so that really worked out where he could be still mixing, and he could send me his session, and we'd make adjustments. And then when there was notes, I'll let you guys talk more about it, Ben, and how you did it, but he would do his notes at home and then send us a revised session. Then I would play it here, play it back through the Clearview. They would hear it. Then we'd print master here. I'd print master here. It was just at that point, it was just me and my recordist in the stage, and everybody was remote. And we print master and do notes, and still do the 5/1 and 2-track print master pass with the clients on the phone. So it was definitely a challenge. I never was on the receiving side of the Clearview, so I didn't know exactly what they were hearing. But Ben and Sue heard it, and there was dropouts and problems with that occasionally, right? It wasn't perfect, but
plus it was just 2-channel stereo, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And sometimes people's internet strength would cause dropouts and things like that. But we were adapting. We were trying to figure out a way to get the show finished. But besides that, editorial-wise, like Sue, you could probably talk about how you had to finish the rest of the season doing remote ADR and wall and all that, right?
Crazy. The editorial side was fine doing fixes from home, but we still had a significant amount of ADR to record. and no one could go to a studio to record it. So all the actors were doing it remote, and you're kind of at the mercy of their technical expertise being able to record on their phone.
Would they just go into their closet and record lines into their iPhone and send them to you?
That's most of it, yeah. And we might say, and then there was a lot of back and forth, like, well, listen to how this sounds. Is this going to work? And sometimes I'd say, well, talk into the clothes, like have more clothes next to you and don't talk into the wall. And so everything just took longer because there was a lot more testing and going back and forth. But yeah, a lot of remote ADR. The clients actually set me up with one of those Clearview boxes at home. And so that's how I was able to basically drive these ADR sessions from home, where I would send them picture and audio through the Clearview. I would send them beeps, and then they could record to picture. Although everything I received was there was no time code. It was all wild. So I just had to manually sync every clip and hope they named it such that I could find it. The naming was not always, perfect. So
things you don't want to have to depend on actors to do for you, right?
Well, they've got a lot to think about. But
they should be focused on performance, without a doubt. Not on file naming.
Yeah. The biggest challenge, though, was that we hadn't recorded our last episode of Loop Group yet for show 8, which was kind of a massive episode.
Well, that's a big riot scene in LA.
The big riot scene in LA. That was all done remote. I think I had like 400 cues of group for that. And we had to do these remote sessions where we were kind of on a conference call like this so that we could communicate and rehearse. But then everyone is recording separately on their own. So I gave Keith a lot of tracks.
I think that was the biggest group session I've ever had.
That is amazing. What a crazy story.
But Sue did such an amazing job. It was about how do you get, a normal group will have a bunch of guys in the room and they're all kind of reacting off of each other and getting that kind of but she was somehow able to get all these individual tracks to play off of each other and these group actors, and it was a huge undertaking by her. She did such an amazing job. And I mean, we used all of it, and obviously we used a lot of Ben's sound design crowds as well. I mean, Ben kind of created the size because it's hard to do that with individual microphones and individual people. But we really used a lot of the walla to feel the buys and more the distinct voices that you wanted to hear at times. But the mass size, I think, came from a lot of the sound design. But the group added so much life to it, because you can only get so much with an effect crowd. The group really brought life to it and made it feel like the people were right there, So help.
Well, before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask one last question of each of you. If you could just tell me it may be, I'm sure there'll be an odd choice, odd unexpected choice, but what's your kind of one favorite of your sound moments in the season? A particular scene maybe that when it comes up in the playbacks just makes you really kind of happy inside about the work that happened. Who wants to go first?
Also, I'll go first. Common People, that first sequence in episode 1, the Dolores escape. It's just, that song is so great, and it's just fun to have somebody in the back seat getting out, getting killed and getting out of the car and moving around. So I mean, that was for me, that was probably the most fun, and it's super memorable because of the song. It's it's just a fantastic song. And I don't know if it's ever even been used in a show before, and this is great. It's that's my favorite, probably my favorite, most memorable.
I loved a lot of moments like Common People and stuff in episode 1, and there's some other. 7 was a really great sounding episode. There's a lot of fun stuff in the whole battle between Dolores and Maeve and them fighting, and that was super cool. I liked a lot of that. Personally, I like every time Ed Harris is on camera. I like his scenes. I just love that guy. I think he's such a great actor, and I love his character. I love the scenes with in the ward with all the different versions of him. I thought that those were just fun to mix, having his voice, 5 times or whatever it was. There's just so many epic moments. But yeah, I guess the Ed Harris stuff this year was just fun for me. I enjoyed doing that.
That sound design, that opening Ed Harris scene in episode 4 always just stands out to me. It was just so well done. And then, yeah, like you said, that other Ed Harris scene where it was just a whole bunch of Man in Blacks from various points in time.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, thanks so much for coming and doing the show. I've been looking forward to this because I'm such a fanboy for Westworld, and to meet you guys and be able to talk about the fantastic sound work on the show was really a treat. Keith, Sue, Benjamin, thanks for coming on and talking with us today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This was fun.
Well, this is Glenn Kaiser signing off from the Dolby Institute and the Soundworks Collection podcast. Please join us again next week when we're going to be talking with the team behind Mindhunter. In the meantime, go back and watch Westworld again. It's fantastic. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.